All right. So one more content mastery video. I want to introduce my brother, Ryan. Um, just so Ryan knows, I've actually posted some other content mastery videos. I've got others. You're right up there with Joseph Spencer and Brian Hales and Patrick Mason on my YouTube channel. So um, no pressure. So
No,
we're
none at
we're just
all.
we're just going to do this video about Isaiah that Ryan had already prepared, and he's given this presentation to a bunch of seminary teachers in his region. So I thought let's just do it again for you teachers and see if it's helpful to you. So kind of turn the time over to Ryan. We'll just kind of discuss this.
I guess maybe to get started, maybe we ought to just briefly discuss the reasons why Isaiah and teaching Isaiah, or maybe just even reading Isaiah, causes a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of stress. And um, I guess in me personally, I've always made the attempt to read Isaiah, and I feel like I do pretty good in the chapters that I'm familiar with. But the other chapters that don't get as much attention, I definitely struggled. I don't know what's your experience with. I know, and I've never taught. This is going to be my first year teaching Isaiah in a seminary environment as well, and so I was really grateful for the assignment to prepare this, because it's helped me feel a little bit more confident. But what are your feelings as far as experiences reading, studying, and teaching Isaiah
Well,
from their perspective?
I do remember this will be the third time coming around, because my first year teaching seminary was Old Testament year. Um, but I remember I remember a couple of things. I remember the fact that the teacher, the seminary teacher manual, you do huge blocks of Isaiah. Um, and so I remember I don't even know if it was a week that we were in Isaiah. I don't even remember if I spent more than 3 days in Isaiah. Um, and that was me. And then I remember I was in a large faculty, and this other teacher who just understood things in a better way than I did. We're coming down to the end of the year. We're supposed to be, wrapping up those minor prophets and be in Malachi towards the end of the year, and we're just asking each other, "Where are you guys at in your classes?" And asking this one teacher, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm just finishing up Isaiah." He'd been in Isaiah for a month and a half. And I'm like, I don't know how you found enough stuff to teach for a month and a half. Like, as a teacher, I couldn't wait to be in and out of Isaiah. So there is obviously stuff there that we typically miss. And I don't think it's any accident when the Savior says that we should be spending time in Isaiah. So that's my experience.
Yeah, there's an intimidation. I guess the other book of scripture that maybe rivals the intimidation, and maybe even the misinterpretation, would be the book of Revelation in the New Testament.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because of the nature of symbolism and prophecy, and so I like the meme that I'm throwing up here, that we sometimes can read these scriptures and these verses, and I don't think it means what you think it means. And so I'm going to be very upfront and just let you know that I borrowed very, very heavily. In fact, let me just start with the reference page. There are a lot of really, really smart scholars that have done some really, really amazing work in helping to kind of understand and get into the. I was listening to a podcast by Terrell Givens yesterday, and he said one of the reasons that we as a modern reader misunderstand scripture is that we are trying to fit the scriptures that were written into our modern context. And that does a disservice to what scriptures are. If we really want to understand what the scriptures are teaching, we need to put ourselves into the ancient context and understand what is happening in their world that would motivate Isaiah to say some of the things that he says.
Yeah.
And so there's really, really smart people that have already done some really great work.
I like how you have James Faulkner's book on here, The Old Testament Made Harder.
Yeah.
Because you do see that in some of the church bookstores. You've got the Old Testament made easier. And boy, I think that's a misnomer for how we're supposed to read the Old Testament, because it's going to require that we got to know the culture. We got to know the context. Like you just have to know some of that stuff to read it properly. And
what I really like about James Faulkner is he's not making it harder in the sense that he's trying to muddy the waters and complicate it.
And that not
he's
all
making it
people
harder in that he's going to ask questions that's going to force you to have to think about what you're reading. And for those that are watching, here's the link. So if you want to just grab a quick, if you know how to use the QR scanner on your phone, and this is a free download through the Maxwell Institute at BYU. You can download his entire PDF of the Old Testament Made Harder, and use that in your preparation. So that's available. It's a free download. So hopefully that'll help.
Yeah.
But I will just say again, this is just scratching the surface. President Ballard in his talk to CES educators a couple of years ago really makes a push for teachers to utilize the academics that are available. There's so much good biblical research, and I don't know if you've made this plug yet for the Bible Project on YouTube, but I'm going to make this plug as well. Good YouTube channel that, though not of our denominational leanings, they tend to stay very, very true to what the actual text of the Bible says, so that we can understand some of the kind of the key principles there. So Bible Project on YouTube is an excellent source as well. Yep. But these are really good. I'm going to talk maybe a little bit later. Robert Alter's Hebrew Bible and this new Oxford annotated Bible is the New Revised Standard Version. These are alternative translations. One of the things that really gets us tripped up when we study Isaiah is not only do we have to try to understand Isaiah, but then we also have to interpret King James English from 500 years ago.
Right.
And they do a really faithful job of interpreting Hebrew, but they try to take Hebrew poetry and then they made it English poetry. Right. And some of the nuance gets lost by doing that. And so alternative translations are very helpful. Put it into a little bit more of a modern English. And then if you have something that also has a commentary, the commentaries can also help to fill in some gaps as far as here's some of the cultural and even Near East approaches to writing and it'll just help kind of fill some gaps. So I would recommend to anybody that's trying to prepare to teach Isaiah to use some of these alternative translations, just so that they can fill in the gaps, so that when you read the King James Version with your students, you can help them see what the big picture, the macro picture is of each of these different chapters. Very, very helpful. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's probably helpful also just identify who Isaiah is and the time that he lives. His name means Jehovah saves. I sometimes often wonder how much these Hebrew names are actual given at the time of birth, and then maybe how much of them are given as who knows,
titles.
Yeah, if they're given titles later, or if it's something that's affixed, but very, very often in the Bible, the name is part of the lesson. So Isaiah, he's going to also name a couple of his sons that are going to have significant meanings, that are going to they are overviews of what his prophetic message is. His ministry began about 733 BC, and his last dated prophecy is 701. So even by our modern standards, a 32-year prophetic ministry is a lengthy ministry. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking like Brigham Young type length of service. And he could have even lived longer. This is just the last dated prophecy that we have. He was very intimate in his relationships with the kings of Judah, King Ahaz and Hezekiah. This is one of those cases, especially when you read the books of First and Second Kings. It seems that the kings of the northern kingdom are the bad guys, the kings of the southern kingdom largely the good guys. But what makes the kings of the southern kingdom the good guys is that part of their reign is the extent to which they utilize and lean on and even receive counsel from prophets. And so he was one that was very engaged in the politics of the day because he was an advisor to the kings. He's also a poet. Isaiah is unique in that this is kind of the first time in the biblical writings where Isaiah is actually going to write his own prophecies. Most of what we see previous is almost kind of the narration or a prose writing of, well, here's what Moses did, and then he says this, and then he does this, and then the people respond this way, and we see that throughout Judges and the historical books. But once we get to Isaiah, this is kind of the first time that we see the prophet writing his own prophecies. There is some prose that's mixed in it, but largely it's going to be poetic. And let me just read this. I don't know, is the presentation still up, or did it go to this Word document?
No, it still has the presentation up.
Okay, so from Robert Alter's commentary, he says this about the use of poetry. There's two reasons for the use of poetry. One's theological and the other pragmatic. In most of these texts, the prophet represents himself as a mouthpiece of God's words. Quote, "Thus saith the Lord" is frequently invoked. It's a messenger formula of introduction, and it is perfectly fitting that God should address Israel not in prose, which is closer to the language of everyday human intercourse, but in the elevated and impressive diction of poetry. More pragmatic reason for the use of verse is that, as in all poetic systems, poetry is memorable. In the technical sense, its formal devices facilitate committing the words to memory. So when you would read Isaiah, much of it is there's rhyme. There's actual rhyme in the use of the words, or at the very least, very similar sounding words being used together to try to add depth and to the imagery that he's trying to communicate. Continuing on, he says, in the case of biblical poetry, this mnemonic function is realized chiefly through the structuring of the lines in semantically paired halves or versets, usually reinforced by an equal number of stressed syllables in each half of the line. And I'm going to show you some examples of that in a moment. Once the first half of the line has been registered in memory, the second half readily follows with a more compact Hebrew exhibiting three strong stresses in the two halves. And it's usually in the case of these biblical poetry, the idea articulated in the first verset is driven home through a concretization of the second verset. So it does give us a reason for the poetry. And maybe let me just show you what that.
We call that parallelism, right? What is the actual term for that?
Yeah, I guess you could. If you look at so this on the left hand side of the screen, you'll see Isaiah 2 the way that we see it in our King James, and it's there. It's great. But on the right hand side is from the Hebrew Bible and the English translation of the Hebrew Bible, And you're going to see that these words or these lines are kind of grouped together. So notice that the mount of the Lord's house shall be firm founded, compared to the mount of the Lord's house shall be established at the top of the mountains and lifted over the hill. So this parallel idea of a mountain of the Lord's house, mountains being the firm, right? And
Right.
then you see, and all nations are going to flow to it, and many people shall go.
Right.
And come, let us to go to the house of the Lord, to the house of Jacob's God, right? And so as you continue, you're going to see these pairings of versets where the first line is, and you can't see that in our King James structure. You just will see a common verse. And so as the modern reader looks at that, it can almost feel like the idea gets jumbled in our heads. And it's hard to see what is it that Isaiah is actually trying to say. But if you look at an alternative translation, and most alternative translations do put the poetry into more of a stanza look, so that it's a lot easier to see these pairings of these lines, that he's not trying to confuse us with a bunch of extra words, but he's trying to emphasize that it's the house. He's going to teach his ways. Zion, and this is another one, Zion and Jerusalem are the parallels. So from Zion shall his teachings come forth, in the Lord's house towards Jerusalem. Well, in Isaiah, Zion and Jerusalem are the same things. Those are synonyms. He's not talking about a future day when we all live in a Zion community like the city of Enoch. He's literally saying Zion equals Jerusalem.
Yep.
And so that will also help us.
So he's hitting the same concept twice from two different directions,
Yep.
Both as a teaching method, but also as almost like a memorization tool.
Yeah, the people in Jerusalem in Isaiah's day don't have the benefit of the printed word.
Right.
There's scrolls in the synagogues, but it takes the scribe an incredibly long amount of time, and it's usually very, very expensive. Only the ruling class or the church, the sanctuaries, the
priestly class.
Yeah, they're the only ones that have access to the actual printed. And so for the larger community, they would go to school and be taught by the rabbis. Well, the reason for the prose or the narrative is so that they know the stories, because the stories teach the lessons. And then if you want to get to the actual prophetic statements, the poetry, and again, in the Hebrew, it makes a lot more sense because the words sound very similar.
Right.
And it's a memorization tactic.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we need to understand that before we start reading, because we can get lost. We can get lost in the details if we spend a lot of time trying to understand what each of these individual words are. And we also have to recognize these are translations from Hebrew. So it's not often in English going to make a lot of sense. That's why I would recommend the use of these alternative translations.
Yeah, that's helpful.
So there's a couple of things that can help a first-time teacher, or even maybe a more experienced teacher. We're gonna use the Book of Mormon to try to help us identify the theological themes of Isaiah, because I think the Book of Mormon, and especially how the Savior invites us to read Isaiah, is helpful. I'm going to give you a very brief kind of history and even some of the geopolitics of the day. That helps to clarify quite a bit. We've already kind of talked about textual structure, but there's a couple other things there. But it's also important to realize, this is from President Oakes. This is an Ensign article that you can go back and look at from January 95 called Scripture Reading and Revelation. But he says the book of Isaiah contains numerous prophecies that seem to have multiple fulfillments. And I think another way that we get ourselves into trouble is we think that a modern fulfillment, that everything that Isaiah says has a latter day fulfillment to it. And that's also going to get us into trouble when we talk about some of the prophecies that are messianic. And I got a couple of things there, but one seems to involve people of Isaiah's day or circumstances. Others might have some other meaning. Often symbolic seems to refer to events in the meridian of time when Jerusalem was destroyed and her people scattered, or after the crucifixion of the Son of God. Still another might have meanings preceding the second coming. And so don't get lost or don't get weird with thinking that the modern interpretation that we have, that we sometimes affix to it, is the only interpretation, because in Isaiah's day it meant something different. And like I said, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But when the Savior talks about greater are the words of Isaiah in 3rd Nephi, there's a commandment there. In fact, he even goes on to say that I command you to go back and study these things. So how does the Book of Mormon maybe instruct us to read Isaiah? The first place that I would go to is in 1 Nephi 13. This is Nephi's vision of the tree of life that his father sees, and it's the interpretation. But in this particular chapter, if you remember from Nephi's vision, he sees kind of a quick overview of what his father sees, but then the angel the spirit first, but then the angel expands the vision to see some future events. He sees the establishment of the Americas by his seed and his brother's seed. So he sees Nephite Lamanite history, and then in chapter 13 it kind of pauses that vision into a more future vision when Gentiles, non-Israelite, non-Nephite, non-Lamanite, basically non-Jew, these Gentile countries are, it's the colonization. So usually where we go to show, look, there's Christopher Columbus, and here's the American Revolution, and these
he gets pretty historical, right?
Yeah, and that's not even the intent of why he's sharing it. It's because we start in verse 20 that Nephi notices that these Gentiles are bringing with them a book.
Right.
And this is where Nephi wants to get to, or at least this is where the angel wants to get Nephi in this vision, that this book was carried. And he asks a question in verse 21, do you know what this book means? And Nephi says, no, I don't understand it. And here's where we get our first clue. Behold, it proceedeth out of the mouth of a Jew. And I, Nephi, beheld it. And he said unto me, the book that thou beholdest is a record of the Jews, which contains the covenants of the Lord. Okay, so clue number one. This book is supposed to be about covenants, which he hath made unto the house of Israel. And it also contains many of the prophecies of the holy prophets. And it's a record like unto the engravings which are upon the plates of brass that you, Nephi, went back and got, except there's not as many of them. So there's an obvious difference between the plates of brass that Nephi has, that he gets from Laban, and this final book that these Gentiles are bringing with them. Nevertheless, they contain the covenants of the Lord, which he hath made unto the house of Israel, wherefore they're of great value or great worth unto the Gentiles. And the angel said unto me, thou hast beheld the book proceed forth from the mouth of the Jew. And when it proceeded forth from the mouth of the Jew, it contained the fullness of the gospel of the Lord, of whom the 12 apostles bear record, and they bear record according to the truth which is in the Lamb of God. Wherefore these things, and I would say that these things in verse 25 are referencing those covenants in verse 23. These things go forth from the Jews in purity unto the Gentiles according to the truth which is in God. And after they go forth by the hand of the 12 apostles of the Lamb from the Jews unto the Gentiles, thou seest the formation of the great and abominable church, which is most abominable above other churches. For behold, they have taken away from the gospel of the Lamb many parts which are plain and most precious, and also many covenants of the Lord have they taken away. And we kind of, in our modern reading of the Book of Mormon, get really weird and we say, oh, maybe that was the Catholic Church, and then maybe it was this, that, and the other, and some nefarious, some monk in a monastery somewhere tearing out pages and this is going to get them. But really what gets lost is this covenant relationship. Joseph Spencer references, if you want to go historical, that in the first and second century after Christ, and it's not even, and the Catholic Church doesn't, it's not even a glimmer in somebody's eye at this point.
Right.
This is two things happening. This is Christians trying to differentiate themselves from Jews, and the Jews themselves saying this new Christian movement has nothing to do with us.
Right.
And so what gets lost is this idea of the covenant. And that's where we see Old Covenant or Old Testament, and somehow this New Testament is this new covenant. And what gets lost is both parties saying neither one of us have anything to do with each other.
Yeah.
And so we start to see this separation where the new Christian movement, to try to distinguish themselves, they say, well, the Jews had their chance and they blew it. They killed Jesus. They had their chance. Here's the new covenant under Jesus. And the Jews are trying to say, no, our covenant is still established. We're still waiting for a Messiah. That Jesus character wasn't him. And so we're still waiting. And so we got these two competing ideologies in that first and second century that then gets kind of codified with the establishment. But the great abominable church is created because the identity of this covenant relationship gets lost by both sides.
That totally changes the idea of the first shall be the last and the last shall be first, because the way that that's often described is, well, the Jews had a chance. They had the whack at the gospel first, and then it went to the Gentiles. And then we think, well, it went to the Gentiles first and then the Jews. The way that you just described that is way more about like identity politics. The early Christians were Jews, but
most of them, yeah,
or
a lot of them anyway.
Well, I mean, in those early days, and I know that there is, a lot of Paul's writings is all about, listen, you don't have to be circumcised first in order to become a disciple of Christ. But it is interesting that being identified as a member of the house of Israel and of the covenant people does change into now we're Christians and no longer do we identify as house of Israel. I find that really interesting, because then you go to the Restoration and the opposite happens. We get a bunch of people who identify as Christians who are gathered into this restored church. And then over time, we start to realize we're of the house of Israel. It's almost like
they knew that too. I mean, when Joseph is
sure, no, I mean that. But when they were first gathered in, they all identify as Christians. And one of the great doctrines of the Restoration is that reestablishment of that covenant community, and we are of the house of Israel.
Yeah, the restoration of Israel.
It's almost as if I've been thinking about this all wrong. Instead of, Jews first, Gentiles second, then Gentiles first, Jews second. It's almost like it's the identity that God's people have that has morphed over time. And then this truly is a restoration of our identity as covenant Israel in those last days. So that's an interesting thought for me, is to see that happen and watch that take place with Nephi.
Yeah, Patrick Mason makes a very interesting observation as he writes his book about restoration. Is in the first 100 years of the church, when church members and prophets are talking about restoration, it's always been about restoration of Israel.
Right.
And it's in the 1900s. It's in the 20th century that it kind of changes to restoration of the church, restoration of the priesthood, restoration of the gospel, because we're starting to enter mainstream US and mainstream America, and now our message has to be about how do we differentiate between denominations. And so now it's restoration of the primitive church, and it's restoration of gospel, and how do we distinguish ourselves from other Christian religions. And President Nelson, it's been just so neat to see him remind us that it's about the restoration of Israel, that we're trying to gather Israel back. He's been scratching that itch his entire ministry.
Yep. Even Chad Webb saying we should stop talking about lost and found, and we really need to be using scriptural terms like scattered, gathered.
Absolutely, which is a very prominent theme in the writings of Isaiah. We're gonna see that. The other thing that leads us really kind of nicely into the title page of the Book of Mormon itself. So Nephi begins his writings with this vision. Moroni, I guess Mormon is
Mormon and
Mormon. Yeah, Mormon kind of puts the icing on the cake with this title page that he writes. It's the last leaf of the plates that gets translated. And here we get, if you look at about halfway down in the second paragraph, starting with that phrase, which is to show, kind of gives the purpose for which the Book of Mormon. And in Nephi's vision, the angel tells Nephi, this book that you're writing, these small plates, is going to reestablish that covenantal truth that gets lost from the Bible. So the Book of Mormon is going to reestablish that link, that old covenant, new covenant are the same covenant, and that both belong together. That whether it's a Christian covenant or the old law of Moses, which the Book of Mormon does a really good job of telling us that the whole purpose of the law of Moses is to point us towards Christ. And the book, but you don't see that teaching in the Bible. And so this is where we see this bridge. Quoting from Mormon here, he says, which is to show unto the remnant. That's a very powerful Isaiah word. Remnant of the house of Israel, what great things the Lord has done for their fathers, and that they may know the covenants of the Lord, that they are not cast off forever. And also to the convincing of the Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God. So when Nephi, at the end of his writings, tells us, here's how we're to interpret Isaiah. He's going to use two kind of really powerful phrases in chapter 25. The first is he's going to use this idea of spirit of prophecy. Hearken, my people, which are the house of Israel, and give ear unto my words. For because the words of Isaiah are not plain unto you, nevertheless they're plain unto all those that are filled with the spirit of prophecy. Well, the spirit of prophecy, according to the book of Revelation, is the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Right.
If we know who Jesus Christ is and what his overall work and glory, those are two kind of triggering words, I hope, to Moses 139, that his whole purpose is to save his people. And how does he save his people? Well, it's through the covenant relationship. It starts with the people of Israel, but it's intended to expand into the whole world. Israel is intended to be the delivery mechanism for this covenant relationship with Christ. I give unto you a prophecy according to the Spirit which is in me. Wherefore I shall prophesy according to the plainness which hath been with me from the time that I came from Jerusalem. So Nephi, because he's from Jerusalem, he gets it. He already gets what Isaiah is about.
Right.
My soul delighted in plainness. Yea, my soul delights in the words of Isaiah, for I came from Jerusalem. Mine eyes have beheld the things of the Jews. And I know that the Jews do understand the things of the prophets, and there is none other people that understand the things which were spoken unto the Jews like them, save it be that they are taught after the manner and the things of the Jews. And here's the two clues. Behold, I, Nephi, have not taught my children after the manner of the Jews, but behold, I of myself have dwelt in Jerusalem, wherefore I know concerning the regions round about. So I know the geography, and I have made mention unto my children concerning the judgments, the geopolitics, which have come to pass among the Jews. So he knows the story, he knows the region, and he knows kind of the political situation, the political climate. He himself, having been a casualty of that political climate that forced him and his family to have to flee Jerusalem. He understands all of that, but he hasn't taught his children that. And we sometimes maybe we look at this and say, well, there was a way that Jews were taught that we're not taught today, and therefore it's it's that he lived there, he was a part of it, and he is a casualty of those experiences. And so he very clearly understands what Isaiah is trying to teach there.
Yeah. No. I think those are usually the chapters and verses we get bogged down on, is when they start referring to geographical locations, to different peoples and to different situations that have zero context for us. And we go, I don't understand Isaiah. Like we throw it all out because we don't understand any of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's a classic example. This is a modern example. If we were to read a headline as we're clicking through our Facebook and it says Trump is going to the Big Apple to meet with the UN. He's upset with Beijing. Okay. Now you and I and the modern reader, we know exactly what this is about. But if we were to take this and go even 100 years ago, but let's go even further. Let's go 500 years into the past, and they were to read this, how would they interpret this headline? So Trump, for them, is a musical instrument, right? Big Apple. So there's this giant apple and there's a trumpet, and they're going to go meet with Un. But we don't know what Un is. Maybe it's a place, maybe it's a person, maybe it's an empire, because he is upset. Well, who is the he? And who's this Beijing character? Or maybe we're not even saying Beijing right? So we go back in time and we share this, and if they're going to be as lost as we are reading about their headlines. And so one of John Hilton has an article. It was in that list. It's called the Isaiah Map. And one of his recommendations to teachers is to teach your students to draw this map and the details, because it's going to help us get a really quick and dirty understanding of the geopolitics. Especially the first half of Isaiah is very, very centric in this area. And so learn to draw the Middle East with the Mediterranean Sea over here, and what you want to do is you want to draw a line, make sure you get the bodies of water. You got the Mediterranean Sea, you got the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea, you got Persian Gulf over on the other side. And then you want to draw a line right above the Dead Sea. And to the north of that line, that's the northern kingdom called Israel. And the capital city is Samaria. The primary tribe of Israel, the ruling tribe, is Ephraim, and the king at that time is Pekah, who is the son of Remaliah. Okay, these are very, very much Isaiah words. But if you know that Samaria is the capital city of the northern kingdom, the Ephraim is the ruling tribe, and the name of that king is Pekah, who is the son of Remaliah, then you already got part of the geopolitics. Okay, in the southern kingdom, capital city is Jerusalem, also called Zion. Don't get weird that thinking when he talks about Zion that he's talking about a future day where we're all living kumbaya, holding hands, and there's no poor or sinning among us. Right. This is just synonymous with Jerusalem. The ruling tribe is Judah, and the king, usually it's a list of different Davidic kings, but most often we're going to see Ahaz and Hezekiah. There's one other kingdom that we need to be aware of, and this is Syria. And Syria's capital city is Damascus. They don't have a ruling tribe because they're not Israel, but their king is Rezin. And so when we start seeing Rezin and Pekah and the son of Remaliah and Ephraim vexes Judah, and when we hear all of that, poetically, we should be thinking of these different peoples, these kingdoms. Okay. Lebanon's also one that pops in there. Lebanon is another kingdom. They're known for their timbers. It's the same place that Solomon gets the wood that they used to build his temple. Okay. The other kind of big important peoples or the political groups are the Assyrians. They are the big bad boys during Isaiah's day. They are the ones that are responsible for the destruction of the northern kingdom. When we talk about the lost 10 tribes, it is because of the Assyrian conquest of Israel that we can see in the book of 2 Kings chapter 17. Okay. Now, the second half of Isaiah deals more with Babylon. I think we're much more familiar with that because that's where the Book of Mormon kind of gets its start, is the exile that takes place from Babylon. And then another phrase that gets brought mention are the Medes, or they're also known as the Persians. So the Babylonians conquer Assyria, Persia then conquers Babylon. And that kind of helps us to just kind of establish the politics. So the regions round about the judgments, well, you've got what's called the Sero-Inframate Conspiracy. At some point, Syria is they're really starting to throw their weight around and exercise their influence on Israel. And so the northern kingdom and Syria, they decide that they're going to go into kind of the word that's used in the King James is a confederacy. But basically what they do is they're going to conspire together. They want to overthrow the Assyrian influence. They want to be independent nations again. And so their idea is, let's get Judah, and between the three of us, we should have enough military might to push Assyria back out. And so they try to persuade Judah to join with them. Well, Isaiah, the Lord, through Isaiah, tells the kingdom of Judah, don't do that. That's a bad idea. In fact, if I can maybe share a funny story about this first screen here, there was a missionary that was trying to understand Isaiah better. He was trying to use Isaiah as a way to maybe inspire, and like, I want to show that Isaiah is important to me. And so he finds this verse that says, associate yourself, in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 9. He's like, oh, that's a good phrase. I'm gonna show that I can be I'm gonna work with other people, and I'm gonna try to be open to different viewpoints and be more understanding. And he said later, he's like, well, maybe I better read like what associate yourself means. And actually, this is where Isaiah is telling the king of Judah, if you associate yourself, that's going to lead to destruction.
Yeah, he should read the rest of that verse.
Yeah, the rest of that verse is pretty. Do you have it?
Yeah.
Go and read it.
It says, associate yourselves, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces. And give ear, all ye of far countries, gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. These
doesn't mean what you think it means.
Yeah, these are warnings.
Now this isn't be open to other people with different. No. This is Isaiah telling the king of Judah, these two countries that want you to join with them, if you join with them, you're going to be destroyed just like they will be destroyed.
Right.
Don't associate yourselves with them. In fact, gird your loins, because it's going to get a little uncomfortable, but God's going to be with you and you're going to be protected. Well, when Judah rebuffs their advances, Syria and Ephraim, the northern kingdom, decide, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go down. We're going to invade Judah. We're going to get rid of their king, and we're going to put a king on the throne that's more sympathetic to our cause, so we can get their military. And it comes to naught. In fact, this is, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but this is where we get the first sign that we don't need to worry about this conspiracy. And the sign is, for a virgin shall bear unto you a son. And we think, oh, it's Jesus scripture. No. This is a prophecy that's going to help King Hezekiah know that he doesn't need to worry about this conspiracy that's happening at 735 BC. This is not, but it could also be a future prophecy. But for Isaiah's specific purposes, he's actually talking about his own wife bearing a son. And in those 9 months, you're going to see this conspiracy is going to just kind of go away.
Interesting.
Okay, so if we don't know this history, we're going to think, oh, this is a Jesus scripture. But then when we read all the verses that are around it, then we're going, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like Jesus. Where am I supposed to see Jesus in this? And we can get confused.
But is there, this is one of those things that President Oakes would say is a dual prophecy.
Oh, yeah. In fact, let me share this quote to you. this is Elder, this is Jeffrey R. Holland. This whole sign was given to the Old Testament King Ahaz, encouraging him to take strength from the Lord rather than military might of Damascus. There are plural or parallel elements to this prophecy. As with much of Isaiah's writings, the most imminent meaning was probably focused on Isaiah's wife, who brought forth a son about this time, the child being a type and a shadow of a greater later fulfillment of the prophecy that would be realized by the birth of Jesus Christ.
So if I'm a teacher and I'm like, oh, well, crap, that just took my Christmas lesson out. Like, right? Like, man, that's not what he meant. But really, when you're looking at that, what I'm thinking automatically is, okay, I need to teach the context. This is what happened. This is the sign. This was to help Judah and their salvation if they followed this sign. Okay, now let's take that. Let's put that to a side for a second. Now, how is this a type for Christ? Well, look at the birth of the virgin giving birth is a sign of the salvation of his people. Like it's still your Christmas lesson. But look at how much layers there are to this, that you teach the actual story found in the scripture, and then you take it and go, well, look at how this is also used in scripture to demonstrate who Christ is. The sign of the virgin giving birth is Hezekiah's salvation. Well, the sign of the Virgin Mary giving birth to Jesus is our salvation. And there, the dual prophecy is not a problem. It's still very Christ-centered. But you're true to what Isaiah meant it to mean, and you're true to what it means for us in the future.
And that's another one of the traps is if we go New Testament backwards, because Matthew's the one that does that. He's the
Absolutely.
one that attributes that connection.
Right.
So if we go New Testament or modern prophecy backwards, we get confused. But if we let Isaiah bake and simmer on its own and go Old Testament forward, then we can see why these New Testament and modern prophets are looking backwards and seeing, okay, so there is duality in this. Yeah. But if we're going to teach Isaiah the way it's intended to be taught, we got to go Old Testament forward. We got to let Isaiah be Isaiah before it becomes Matthew and Christian interpretation. Like we gotta allow Isaiah to simmer and boil and do his thing. So that's why we got to start here.
And that shouldn't make us uncomfortable, because it didn't make Jesus uncomfortable.
No.
He told us to go back and read Isaiah. Yeah, he told us to go back and study it. So if Jesus isn't worried about that process, neither should we. We need to make sure that that's in the forefront.
And we're going to see why Jesus isn't uncomfortable with it in a moment. A couple other things to be aware of. The Assyrian invasion, kind of a big deal there because of this Sero-Inframate attempt to try to push the bad boys out of town. Assyria's like, fine, I'm flexing, y'all are, and what Assyria does is they like to transplant their conquered peoples to other parts of their empire and bring peoples from other parts of the empire that have been conquered into those areas. And this is the beginnings of the Samaritan kind of. So when we get to New Testament, we really want to understand why Samaritans are so frowned upon in Jesus's day. It's because of this, because Israel's taken away, other peoples are brought in, non-Israelites, and they start to mingle with any of the residual Israelites there. And it's kind of like they have dirtied the waters. They've mixed the practices of religion with paganism of Assyrians. But also what happens because they're taken from their homelands and mixed with other peoples, their identity as Israelites get lost. And so they get lost. And they're taken to northern countries and they're lost as to their identity as Israelites.
And never brought back. I think there's a difference between Isaiah's, what he's talking about, and then what happens in the future with like Daniel. Babylon has a different mode. Babylon will actually take them all out and empty the land, bring them to Babylon, let them become Babylonian,
but maintain their identity as
and
Israel.
maintain that identity, and eventually they're allowed to come back.
Yeah, when the Persians conquer Babylon, the Persian king is what allows them to return to their land.
Yeah, Assyria never come back. They're
Yep.
mixed and then spread out, and they completely are lost.
So that helps us understand that as we look now at the textual structure of Isaiah, most biblical scholars agree that there are two major divisions in the book of Isaiah, even to the point that there's even a train of thought that all of the writings of Isaiah are not the same Isaiah, that there might be multiple, maybe even an Isaianic school where some of his disciples continue with his writing style, his preaching style, because we see chapters 1 through 39 deal largely with the Assyrian problem,
Right.
and then 40 through 66 jump forward in time 150 years to the Babylonian conquest and eventual return. And whatever, it's a theory.
Yeah, they call it in the scholarly realms. It's Isaiah 1, Isaiah 2, and possibly Isaiah 3.
And possibly in Isaiah 3.
Yeah.
But the only reason I bring that up and to mention it is that there are those who are trying to use this as evidence that the Book of Mormon can't possibly be true, because we get a lot of second Isaiah writings in the brass plates that Nephi and other prophets quote from, that are quoted in the Book of Mormon. Joseph Spencer argues that that's not really even a problem, because even if we go to the third Isaiah, none of the quote third Isaiah chapters show up in the Book of Mormon. It's only the first two. So basically it's through 54, 55, 56, somewhere around there. And the last 10 chapters would be that third. That it's very likely that even those prophecies about Babylon and a return of exile very, very likely could have still been in the brass plates, because it would have been contemporary to. I mean, he says that Jeremiah's writings are in the brass plates.
Right.
Jeremiah is a contemporary. But I only bring that up in case students happen to read some of those arguments against the Book of Mormon and say, well, how is it possible that these later writings of Isaiah are in the Book of Mormon when they weren't even written down yet? And you can argue that all you want, but anyway.
Yeah.
We've kind of already talked about poetry, so I'm not going to spend much more time there. Let me just kind of skip past this. We kind of already showed these verse sets. I can't emphasize and recommend enough the use of an alternative translation. The New Standard Revised Version tends to be the most non-denominational, meaning it's not gonna lean and use any kind of subtle. The NIV tends to be very ecumenical. It's very much lean heavy towards Protestant, evangelical kind of understandings and interpretations of the Bible, but the New Standard Revised is very academic. Seems to be pretty true to some original intent there.
You can find. I once had it was a spectrum kind of diagram of biblical translations, from super literal, the Hebrew said this, so this is what I'm going to translate it, to super interpretive, right? And then all the different biblical translations and where they fall on that spectrum. And interestingly, I can't remember where King James Version was.
It's kind of in the middle. It was middle to true to the literalism.
It was kind of right there. And so you can find these different study Bibles that will be on different places. And I know that we've come from a place that King James Version is the most correct book. I've heard somebody say that. That's the most correct translation of the Bible. And I'm like, Joseph didn't even say that. I mean, Joseph said the Germanic Bible was closest. We use the King James Version. Why? Like, why? Why is that the one that we use? Is that Common
right here is this is from our
handbook.
It's from our handbook. When possible, members should use a preferred or church published edition of the Bible in church classes and meetings. This helps maintain clarity in the discussion and consistent understanding of the doctrine. Other editions of the Bible may be useful for personal or academic study.
It's interesting.
So this comes right from our handbook of instruction, that it helps to maintain the consistency of discussion, so that when we're reading, I mean, just take a group of teenagers, and if as long as we're all reading the same words, then they're all in the same place together. But as soon as somebody's reading an alternative translation and somebody else is following along and doesn't know, they're like, wait a minute, where are you reading? Mine doesn't say this. It can become confusing. But I will make this statement. This is for the benefit of your teachers. If they think that this is somehow blasphemous or Elder Uchtdorf quoted from an alternative translation of the Bible, not this last conference, but the previous, the one where he's talking about walking in circles. He quotes from an alternative translation of the Bible. In fact, he does it pretty regularly. We just aren't paying that close attention to.
Well, he is German, so
that's right. Germans just do things differently.
Yeah, I did have this last year in the first semester of Old Testament in our seminary classroom, as actually the other teacher in my program. She had a student who preferred a different version of the Bible. And so in class, they'd be using King James Version as they're reading stuff out loud and discussing it. And he would raise his hand and go, that's really interesting. Here's what my translation says. And then they would compare the different translations. And often that just
what a beautiful conversation.
Yeah, that just added a really great kind of layer to the discussion. So I would say don't shy from it. Obviously, King James Version probably needs to be our language just because everybody has it, but don't shy away from the other editions.
And it is also where our cross-references are. It's where our footnoting is. It's also
the Book of Mormon is written kind of in the King James language.
Yeah, and we're going to see the Joseph Smith translations there. And so, like, But if we're going to understand, just know that there's more out there that we can use, and it doesn't change it. It just enhances. It's just a little bit of flavor, just a little bit of salt on the dish.
Yep.
Let me do this last couple of things. This part kind of quickly, because I want to get to really what to look for in the theme of Isaiah. But this is from a book that you can get at Deseret Book. It's called Jehovah and the World of the Old Testament. It's excellent for context, but if you're reading it as just a nice read on a beach somewhere, it'll kill your brain. But if you want it as a resource to, like, all right, I want to know about the kings after the two kingdoms split, great. Here's some really good stuff. I want to know about Near Eastern philosophies or Near Eastern approaches to writings. Great, here's some stuff. There's even, anyway, so it's a good book from context, but it's not like it's not a page turner by any means. I've had many a nap reading that book. Textual structure though, but if you want to kind of break Isaiah into, because the chapters are a modern concept. Isaiah didn't really write in terms of chapters, and sometimes we can lose a lot of meaning in our reading if we're just a chapter a day kind of a people, because we'll read to a chapter, we'll consume it and we'll ponder it, and then when we start the next day, we've forgotten what we've already read, and we think we're starting from scratch, a brand new concept, a new idea, a new series of prophecies. And so when we read these, you're gonna see that there is kind of some overall themes that kind of weave into it. So these, take it for what it's worth. But this is how they kind of group these chapters. What's interesting about this is when Nephi quotes Isaiah in those chapters in 2nd Nephi, it's mostly this. It's mostly it's 2 through 14 is what gets quoted, but it's mostly this. Then he skips these, and then he kind of paraphrases, and then chapter 29 especially about this marvelous work and a wonder
Yeah.
gets really hit hard.
Yeah.
And then there's some history here, story of Isaiah. And anyway, but really, here's where Nephi is quoting pretty heavily, and he quotes pretty heavily here. Abinadi is mostly in the prophecies of deliverance.
Yeah.
How beautiful are the feet, those kinds of stories. The suffering Messiah, the suffering servant idea. But this will help kind of strategize of what is how do I weave and interconnect all of these things together. Really, what we got to look at is the theology of what Isaiah is trying to do in this first half. This is from Joseph Spencer's book, Vision of All, 25 lectures. I can't recommend this book enough. If you just, and it is an easy read, because he writes it as if he was delivering a series of lectures. And so he's writing in a speaking way that's very easy to follow. But he says this about Isaiah's theology. He says, behind the prophet's confidence in Judah's exceptional status lies a larger investment in a certain conception of history. Key words in Isaiah's prophecies are counsel and work. What do these words express at the theological level? At least this: Isaiah has real confidence in the Lord's sovereignty over history, and he fully believes that all historical and political events bear witness to that sovereignty. As history unfolds, the divine plan makes itself known. God, it turns out, is up to something with all this messy history. God has a work to accomplish, something that he aims to get done by manipulating history. And what is that purpose? It's this idea of remnant. The word remnant is found 16 times in chapters 1 through 39. In fact, if I can just go to Isaiah chapter 10, it's going to take me a sec because I've been in some other places.
While you go to Isaiah 10, isn't it interesting that the Isaiah chapters take place pretty quickly after 2 Nephi chapter 5, which is that moment where not only has the Lehite colony become a remnant, but now in the promised land, Nephi has separated himself from his brothers, and now the Nephites have become a remnant of the remnant. So it's interesting that that's where that's placed in the Book of Mormon.
In fact, the entirety of the Book of Mormon history is this story after story after story of the remnant surviving just long enough for the record to be written, because there's constant dissension, there's constant rebellion, there's constant destruction, and the Nephite remnant survives just long enough for Mormon to compile and finish this record, give it to his son, who sees the end and the destruction. The Lamanites are going to survive, and this remnant is going to last just long enough to accomplish his purposes. So here's what Isaiah says in chapter 10. It shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob shall no more again stay upon him that smote them. It's referring here to the Assyrians, right? This remnant is going to survive the Assyrian onslaught, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. For though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return. The consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness, meaning this destruction that is going to come is going to serve a righteous purpose. And if you notice what happens in chapter 11, it's this idea that the stem of Jesse will judge in righteousness. It's this knowledge of God. It becomes this millennial prophecy that this tiny little stem is going to survive long enough, and it is going to become, later in the chapter, it says, this is going to be an ensign to the people. It's going to be the standard, and to it shall the Gentiles seek. This little piece, this is going to be something that Gentiles are going to want to, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros, from Cush and Elam and from Shimnar and Hamath and unto the isles of the sea. This is where Nephi is like, hey, that's us. Isles of the sea. We have been separated from the homeland, and we are somewhere so far out. We are the isles of the sea, and he shall set up an ensign to the nations and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Isn't that beautiful? That's where it's going here. Again, from Joseph Spencer, the point of God's work through Assyria is to prune the house of Jacob back so that it's made up of just those who will return unto the mighty God. The word return here in Hebrew has a strong sense of repentance and conversion, right? Turning our hearts, change of hearts. There's thus a consumption or a destruction that's planned, but one that will nonetheless overflow with righteousness. God's work then is to reduce Israel to a righteous remnant and a sealed book they're prepared to read. This is where we get into Isaiah 29. Okay, so with that, we now need to go to 3rd Nephi chapter 23. This is going to help us to see again what is the Book of Mormon training us to see as we read Isaiah.
Hey, how much can you hear the construction noise in my mic? Like when I
No,
mute,
I don't hear anything.
When I mute, does it make a difference?
I don't hear any
Okay.
construction.
I'm hoping it's not picking up. Anybody who's listening to this, if you hear like a low hum, I'm sorry, they're grinding something on my roof. So, before you go to 3rd Nephi 23, it's interesting that in chapter 11, verse 13, after he's talking about this great gathering, it's almost as if, I think about the political kind of contention that we experience today. And I love how he kind of points out the fact that in verse 13, the envy of Ephraim shall depart, the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. And he's like, this is how great things are going to be. Our political adversaries are no more. Like it's done. It's almost as if we can say today, can you imagine a day when Republicans and Democrats don't hate each other? Can you imagine a day
lion laying down with the lamb?
Yeah, the gathering is gonna be so great that we're gonna, like, that's not a thing anymore. The adversary, that adversarial and that enmity is gone. So I just think that's funny.
Yeah. So I have this little warning. This is a Joseph Spencer warning. And this is a recommendation. Again, we've talked already about this. Let's let Isaiah simmer and be Isaiah before we start applying some New Testament understandings to it. And he makes this kind of a startling suggestion, and I'm going to make it as well, only because if you look at the Come Follow Me curriculum, it's going to tell you to do the exact opposite. The Come Follow Me curriculum is going to say, look for Jesus everywhere in Isaiah. And my suggestion is, wait, stop looking for Jesus in every chapter of Isaiah. And I in my notes here, this is intended to be cognitive dissonance, right? And Joseph Spencer says we are to be Christ-centered in our teachings, but it's essential first to get clear about what Isaiah says without trying to import into it anything that you know about Christ from the New Testament. Try to figure out what he's saying on his own terms. And then if what he is saying strongly anticipates a redeemer to come, a kind of royal or priestly figure, you're probably right to read it as anticipation of Christ in some way or another. But don't start from the New Testament. My experience is that it'll only confuse you, and there's a reason for all this. Isaiah's chief purpose wasn't to predict Messiah. his chief purpose becomes clear. And this is where we go to 3rd Nephi. So when he says in chapter 23, great are the words of Isaiah, for he spake as touching all things concerning my people, which are of the house of Israel. Therefore, it must needs be that he must speak unto the Gentiles. So Jesus is not worried about us finding him in Isaiah. He's actually telling us that Isaiah is going to speak about Israel. His purpose isn't messianic and Jesus prophecies. His purpose is about this, what is going to cause this reunion of the Israelite covenant, the Gentile covenant of Christians, and how they're going to come back together. And maybe to prove my point a little bit, I'm going to go back a little bit in time to chapter 20. I know you're smiling because I'm imagining the same teachers that are going to be like, Jesus, and get really flustered about this. Let's go back in time. Let's look at what Jesus, so day one of Jesus among the Nephites is his introduction. Here's who I am. Come and touch. I'm going to teach you my doctrine, baptism, the gift of the Holy Ghost, faith and repentance. Those are important. I'm going to then teach you what I taught in Jerusalem, the Beatitudes. And then he starts in chapter 16 to say, okay, you are the other sheep. You are of the house of Israel. And he starts to talk about who they are and their identity. And then he notices in chapter 17, it's been a long day. You're tired. You're not getting my words right now. So how about this? You go home and rest. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll have this great conversation. And then he notices, don't leave. And he heals them and angels and all that. When he comes back the next day, he implements the ordinance of the I guess he does the sacrament too before he leaves. But he reintroduces the sacrament, and they have a little kind of refresher session, like, I'm glad you're listening to these 12 men that I left behind. And then about halfway through chapter 20, starting about verse 10, he says, behold, now I finish the commandment which the Father hath commanded me concerning this people who are a remnant of the house of Israel. And if you just kind of go from there, verse 12, this is the commandment, the fulfilling of the covenant which the Father hath made unto his people. Verse 13, then shall the remnants which shall be scattered abroad the face of the earth be gathered in. Verse 16, you who are a remnant of the house of Jacob, you're going to go forth and you're going to be in the midst of them, kind of like a lamb in the midst of a lion, and the lion's going to tear you up. Verse 18, I'm going to gather you, my people, together as a man gathereth the sheaves. I'm going to make you my people, with whom the Father hath covenanted. It's all this idea that I'm going to I'm going to take this remnant and we're going to restore this covenant. Verse 22, unto the fulfilling of the covenant which I made with your father Jacob. And it's going to happen here in this new Jerusalem. The powers of heaven are going to be in the midst of them. Verse 25, ye are the children of the prophets, and ye are the house of Israel, and ye are the covenant which the Father hath made unto your fathers. And he continues with this over and over and over for 46 verses. And then in chapter 21, he's going to say, now I'm going to give you a sign that you're going to know that this gathering is about to take place. And here's the sign. When these works, this is verse 5, and the works which shall be wrought among you hereafter shall come forth from the Gentiles unto your seed. Meaning, these things are being written down, and they're going to come forth from a Gentile. This Gentile is a pretty great guy. His name's Joseph, and he's going to bring these things forth. And the first mission that he sends, the official mission, is to take these things to the Lamanites. When these things come forth, behold, it's going to come from the Gentiles. Then you shall know. Then you're going to know that that's the day that this gathering is take place. In verse 9, now notice the Isaiah language here. For my sake shall the Father work a work, which shall be great and a marvelous work among them. That's chapter 29. Yeah. This is that sealed book that the haughty and the educated couldn't read, but this one uneducated guy, he could.
Well,
And verse
and
22,
well,
verse
and
22. Yeah, go ahead.
and to add that all together, that marvelous work and a wonder that we hear so much, you hear that repeatedly in Doctrine and Covenants, repeatedly, 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 until about section 18 and 19. We stop actually talking about it, but it's because of what just took place in that time frame in sections 18 and 19. It was the publication of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, the book is now published.
The book is published. The marvelous work and a wonder has been completed, and now comes the work of the gathering because of this.
We're going to take this to the Lamanites, and in the midst of all that, we're going to start gathering. And then he quotes Isaiah 54, which is the last days. Now we can affix Zion to this modern context, because the Savior is telling us in the Book of Mormon to do so, that this is this future day where we're going to establish, and Israel is going to be gathered in mercy and tenderness. And who's going to do it? It's the Gentiles that's going to do it. They're going to find that connection between that old covenant with this new covenant. We're going to reestablish Israel as the covenant people,
which we did a really good job with in those early days, like we said, but that message got lost. I really do feel President Nelson is fulfilling this part of this prophecy. We're starting to see this in a new way now. We are Israel, and we are gathering Israel.
Well, even President Benson saying we're under condemnation because we don't read the scriptures. We need to flood the earth with the Book of Mormon.
That was foundational to get us to President Nelson.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then to President Hinckley, and we're going to build all these temples so that all of Israel can make these covenants.
Yep.
And now he's all right. Let's go gather them in. We've got the infrastructure now.
Yeah, we got all the scaffolding. We got the tool to help gather them, and we've got the houses of the Lord to get them covenanted. Now let's go.
So when I say don't get weird about finding Jesus everywhere, Jesus is this is what Jesus is about. It's about this work.
It's his work.
In fact, let me just show you my form of Reformed Egyptian here. So with this understanding, I went through those 12 chapters that Nephi really emphasizes. And if I don't know if you can really see it, it's not super clear there, but you got to use some really good I don't know, here, let me do this. Let me change it to slideshow mode there. Maybe that's a little better.
Yeah, that's better.
So if you take those first 12 chapters as a unified message, and you're going to have to use some really, really, really good summarizing skills, like chapter 2, summarizing the entirety of the chapter, you just see over and over again the difference between exalted being made low. Exalted being made low. The Lord is going to, the house and the law and the light of God, that's the exalted part, but the idols and the wealthy, they're going to be brought low. And then verse 3, if you continue on, because for behold, here's this destruction that's coming. It's a result of your political mess that you've created. And in fact, here's how bad it's going to be. Only women and children are going to be left. Like that's how bad it's going to get, because they know, because of how they exalted themselves and they had to be brought low, like at the expense of the poor. You made yourself so high, you're going to be destroyed. It's going to get so bad that only a remnant. Here's our first remnant idea. This idea that they're going to be escaped. They're going to be redeemed in the same manner as Exodus, but the message is, okay, Judah, don't do what Israel's doing. They're going to put a lot of pressure on you to try to join them. Chapter 7 is that conflict. We see that. And even in chapter 7, that's where, let's see, did I put it in there? That chapter 7 is where we get that Jesus prophecy about a virgin, right? And Matthew's going to take that and he's going to tell us, yep, that's a Jesus prophecy, but Isaiah's not. No, that's not what Isaiah's trying to say. Isaiah's trying to say that this prophecy, you don't need to worry about it, because in 9 months' time, it's not going to be a problem anymore. And in fact, this is Maher Shalal Hasbaz is a name that child is going to be named. And so it does tell us that maybe that virgin, and virgin isn't oftentimes the best translation, but it's how it's translated. It's Isaiah's wife. She's going to give birth, and they're going to name his son. They're going to name the son. Here's a tongue twister for you. Maher Shalal Hasbaz, which means hurry to the spoils. Because Judah is so keen to align with Assyria, it's going to cause us some problems. And instead of letting God and looking towards the sanctuary of who God is, that's where he talks about, instead of being a sanctuary, God's going to be a stumbling block. And the people are going to turn to other sources of communication, only to recruit more darkness in their lives. Nevertheless, there's hope, right? Israel, there's going to be, again, we're going to get this idea of another remnant, this idea of remnant. And Assyria, be careful. Don't feel yourself, mighty britches here, because you're only fulfilling God's purposes to create the environment for which this remnant is going to survive. So don't feel so haughty about yourself.
Yeah, he calls them the rod of his anger, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
There's eventually, you're going to fall too. Babylon's coming. Babylon's going to conquer you. So don't get so, but you are fulfilling his work. And then chapter 11, here's this remnant, this stem, and there's going to be this work that's going to take place. And then chapter 12 ends with this elated thanksgiving. Look at how great God is. And so when we and so the entirety of these 12 chapters is where Jesus is. Yeah. Look at how great he is in remembering covenants, and how great he is in not only remembering covenants, but providing this remnant so that the covenant can continue to exist.
Yeah. And come follow me. This is the first week of Isaiah 1 through 12. So that message there is neat and tidy for a week of seminary lessons. How do you get to the point where we see scattering, gathering, remnant, and the ultimate salvation, using what Isaiah gives us, pulling in Nephi's version, and ultimately seeing the redemption of Israel in the last days. So, yeah.
And I realize I've only given you the first half of Isaiah, but the second half is a little bit easier to understand, because it's about promises of comfort and deliverance.
Yeah.
Redemption.
We get 5 weeks in Isaiah. Did I count that right? 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah, I think so. That's fantastic.
So you get the first week is 1 through 12, and that's awesome. And then you get these others that are going to come. They grouped them pretty good. Don't kick against the pricks. The way that it's grouped is probably going to be to your benefit as you're looking at the overall themes and messages. So yeah, this is going to be great. It's going to be great.
I've just so appreciated having this chance to study it in this way. It's opened my eyes. I'm more excited to teach Isaiah than I ever have, because I feel like letting Isaiah be Isaiah first, I can now when I see it quoted in the Book of Mormon, I see it quoted in
New its Testament, context, I see
it quoted in the Doctrine and Covenants, because Isaiah is quoted in every book of Scripture. Pearl of Great Price, he's quoted even, and that's obviously in Moroni's messages to Joseph, but so quoted in these other areas that, yeah, now I get the context. Like, why is this context now fitting in this section? Well, it's because here's what Isaiah saw, and here's what Nephi recognizes, and that's really what Nephi means when he says, I liken the scriptures. It's not try to find an obscure scripture and try to stick it into my world. It is me going into Isaiah's world and seeing how he sees it, and then recognizing, okay, I can see how he intends us to see this today now. I'm not proof texting, just taking things out of context like we sometimes are guilty of doing. I can see the bigger picture, and it's aligned with what President Nelson is teaching and his context there.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we did
That's
pretty
a
good.
lot, man. I apologize for being long-winded, but I mean, 39 chapters of Isaiah can't be just done in 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, this is good. I'm gonna stop recording now.